Some stories are just so wild, so completely unbelievable, they feel like they have to be made up. But the story of Lanza Flight 508, it's all true. It's the incredible account of a teenager who survived something that, frankly, no one should. So let's dive into this amazing story of survival, a journey that really tests the absolute limits of what a person can endure.
10,000 feet. That's almost 2 miles straight down. Just try to wrap your head around that. Falling from that height out of a plane that's literally breaking apart around you and then landing in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. A fall like that should have been the end of the story. Instantly.
So that's the big question, right? How on earth do you survive something like that? We're going to break down not just the crazy physics of the fall itself, but the absolutely unbelievable journey of survival that came after.
All right, so to really get the miracle, we have to start with the disaster. And it all begins on Christmas Eve, 1971. It was a flight that should have been full of holiday excitement, but instead, it was pretty much doomed from the start.
So this was Lanza Flight 508. It was carrying 86 people, most of them just trying to get home for Christmas. But the airline, well, it had a terrible reputation. It was so bad, people actually had a joke that Lanza stood for "it falls on its stomach." And to make matters worse, the plane itself, a Lockheed Electra, was built for flying over deserts, not for the wild, volatile weather you get over the Andes. The stage was absolutely set for tragedy.
About half an hour into the flight, the pilots made a decision, a fatal one. Instead of flying around a huge thunderstorm, they flew right into it. For 20 terrifying minutes, that plane was shaken violently. Luggage was flying out of the overhead bins, hitting passengers, and then, at 21,000 feet, a massive bolt of lightning hit the right wing. Within seconds, the wing was just gone. It sheared right off and the plane started to break apart in midair. On the radar screen down below, the little dot that was Lanza 508 just vanished.
And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, a 17-year-old girl named Julianne Kopka, still strapped into her window seat, was thrown out of the disintegrating plane. Her fall started from about 10,000 feet up. And that brings us right to the heart of this mystery. How did she survive a fall that should have been impossible to survive?
Okay, so her survival wasn't just one single miracle. It was more like a perfect storm of 3 incredible factors. First, the thunderstorm itself had these powerful updrafts, winds blowing upwards, that acted kind of like a parachute, slowing her down. Second, the row of seats she was attached to started spinning, creating drag, kind of like a maple seed or a helicopter's rotor blades. It's a phenomenon called autorotation. And finally, she crashed into the thickest part of the Amazon canopy, where all the leaves and vines acted like a giant natural safety net.
Julianne woke up the next morning, Christmas Day, on the jungle floor. She was alive, but barely. She had a broken collarbone, a sprained knee, and deep cuts all over her body. One of her eyes was swollen completely shut, and she'd lost her glasses, so everything was just a blur. The sounds of the plane, the storm, the screams, all of that was gone. All she could hear were the sounds of the jungle. And then came the chilling realization. She was completely, utterly alone.
Yeah, surviving the fall? That was just Act 1. Now came the real test, an 11-day ordeal, injured and all alone in one of the most dangerous places on the planet. What she did next would decide if that incredible miracle was all for nothing.
Now here's the thing, and this is absolutely crucial. Julianne wasn't just any teenager. Her parents were famous zoologists who actually ran a research station, Panguana, deep in the Amazon. She literally spent years of her life in this exact environment. She knew which snakes were venomous, what insects to stay away from, and most importantly, she knew how to think instead of panic. This knowledge, this was her superpower. And the most important piece of advice she had came straight from her dad. He once told her something simple but brilliant. If you're ever lost in the jungle, find water. A small stream will always lead to a bigger one, and that will lead to a river. And people live on rivers. This simple piece of logic became her map, her compass, her only hope.
So as she was following a stream, on the 4th day, she stumbled onto something truly horrifying. It was another row of seats, just like hers, that had crashed nose first into the ground. 3 passengers were still strapped in, buried 3 feet deep into the earth. For one terrifying moment, she thought one of them might be her mother. But after she checked the woman's feet, she saw painted toenails and just felt this wave of relief. Her mother never wore nail polish.
By the 9th day, Julianne was hitting a wall hard.
The tiny bag of candy she'd found in the wreckage was long gone. A deep cut in her arm had gotten infected, and maggots, she counted 30 of them later, were eating their way into her flesh. She was weak, she was starving, and she was starting to hallucinate. That will to just keep going was fading fast.
And just when you think it's over, when all hope is pretty much gone, the jungle offered a sign. It was small, but it was enough to keep her moving, and it led her to the climax of her incredible journey, a moment of rescue and also devastating revelation. On the 10th day, after basically just drifting and swimming down a larger stream, she found a small boat tied to the bank. A boat! I mean, can you imagine? It was the first sign of another human being she had seen in 10 days. She followed a little path up from the boat and found a tiny, empty hut that local loggers used. She had found shelter.
She waited in the hut, just too weak to move. And that evening, 3 men appeared out of the forest. But when they saw her, this pale girl with ripped clothes, swollen eyes, covered in wounds, they were terrified. I mean, truly terrified. They thought she was the Yakumama, a kind of mythical water spirit from their local folklore. But Juliane, using the last bit of strength she had, explained in Spanish who she was and what happened.
Their response was just a mix of total shock and confirmation. They told her they had heard about the crash of Flight 508, but all the news reports had said there were no survivors. In that one sentence, Juliane's incredible 11-day fight was finally over. But it also delivered the one piece of news she had been dreading the most. Her mother, and everyone else on that plane, was gone.
You'd think being rescued is the end of the story, right? But for Juliane, in so many ways, it was just the start of a whole new one. The trauma of that crash and her ordeal in the jungle, it would shape the entire rest of her life.
14. This number, this is maybe the most heartbreaking discovery of all. The one that would haunt Juliane forever.
Well, later on, investigators discovered a tragic truth. At least 14 other people, possibly including her own mother for a time, had actually survived the fall. But they were too injured to move, or maybe they just didn't have Juliane's unique knowledge of the jungle. They waited for a rescue team that, because of how dense the rainforest was, never found them. Juliane only survived because she didn't wait. She moved.
Instead of turning her back on the jungle that had caused her so much pain, Juliane did the exact opposite. She embraced it. She followed right in her parents' footsteps, became a brilliant biologist. Eventually, she even took over as the director of the Pangwana research station they had founded, the very place she was trying to fly to on that Christmas Eve. She dedicated her life's work to studying and protecting the Amazon.
But the psychological scars, those never fully heal. This quote from her really reveals the deep survivor's guilt that has followed her whole life. That feeling of why me that never really goes away. The miracle of her survival came with a very heavy, lifelong burden.
Juliane Koepke's story is it's one of impossible odds, incredible knowledge, and a will to live that is just unbreakable. It forces us to ask ourselves what we might be capable of when we're faced with the truly unimaginable. Her journey through that jungle wasn't just about surviving. It was about finding a way to live with having survived, and that's something worth thinking about.